Todd Dunn here on July 28, 2019. This afternoon, I thought I'd take you guys along while we go for a sail aboard my 1972 Allied Princess 36 Sequester. I'm going to be doing voiceover on this because it was pretty windy and I didn't want to have to fight the wind noise. So, come along for a sail. Here we are just outside Southwest Harbor, sailing east across the Great Harbor. The island in the distance there is Sutton Island, and we're going to sail on the south of that island as we continue to head east toward the Cranberry Islands. Now, as we pan south, we can see the Cranberry Islands in the distance to the southeast. There are actually two islands there. The closer one is Great Cranberry, and the more distant one is Little Cranberry. Pan north, looking at Mount Desert Island, and finally west to look back at Southwest Harbor, where we've just come from. Here we are sailing between Sutton Island to the north. That's on the left here. We're headed sort of east-southeast, and Great Cranberry Island on the south. Our destination at this point is Islesford Harbor on Little Cranberry Island. Islesford is the town on Little Cranberry Island. Once we get into there, we'll tack around and head back west. At this point, we're in a wind shadow to some extent of Great Cranberry Island, and the wind has dropped off from nearly 20 knots when we were sailing across the Great Harbor to maybe only about 10 knots or so. Now we're on our final approach into Islesford Harbor. You can see the town dock there on the port bow, and if you look closely you can see some of the moored boats. There's a small sailboat heading out, going toward the left side of the screen as we head on into the harbor. Our boat speed here is picked up to around 6.5 knots because we've pretty much sailed out of the wind shadow of Great Cranberry Island, and the wind almost always scales up when you sail into Islesford. And it can actually be blowing pretty hard, usually out of the southwest over here. So, we'll start heading in closer to the town. Now we're getting closer to Islesford Harbor, and if you look just over the left-hand edge of the Dodger, you can see a white sail. That's the friendship sloop Eden that we encountered several times during the sail today, and it's going to pass quite close to us and get a good look at a friendship sloop under sail. And after we exchanged waves, they passed, headed west, and I'll pan back, looking west, and there they go, headed back west toward Mount Desert Island on a beautiful day here on the Great Harbor of Mount Desert Island. Now we've tacked around just outside the mooring field in Islesford and are headed back west. Here's Mount Desert Island's hills to the north, and looking back at Islesford Harbor as we head west in the general direction of Southwest Harbor. The plan is to head a little bit south into the western way and then tack. Here we are sailing past the western end of Great Cranberry Island. You can see Great Cranberry Harbor there, and as I pan across, as we sail out into the western way proper, you can see the western hills of Mount Desert Island. At this point, we had come out of the wind shadow of Great Cranberry Island, and the wind scaled up a little bit, and we were sailing along and making about 6 to 6.5 knots, and I think we touched 7 knots briefly. Here we are out in the Western Way proper. We're now sailing sort of west-southwest toward the western part of Mount Desert Island. passing the Bell here in the Western Way. And now we can look back at the Cranberry Islands, Great Cranberry and Little Cranberry. And we'll swing around. And now we're looking over at Southwest Harbor. And the plan now is to sail all the way across the Western Way and then tack around and run back toward Bear Island. At this point, we've sailed all the way across the Western Way, and we jibed around and headed back northeast toward Bear Island and Bear Island Lighthouse. And you can see ahead of us here that there's another boat sailing with just their Genoa and mizzen sail. This is a Hinckley 41, and he'll cross our path as we continue running north toward Bear Island and the lighthouse. And the plan is to come in fairly close to the lighthouse and then to tack around and head back west along the north side of Greening Island and past the entrance to Somme Sound. Here we are looking east at the western end of Sutton Island, which is quite rocky. Then we'll pan back over to look toward Bear Island and the Bear Island Light, which I will now zoom in so we can get a closer look at it. We were going to sail pretty close to the light, but there was just too much lobster gear there, and it just looked like it would be a real problem to get through it all. Now we've tacked around and are sailing west across the northern end of the Great Harbor. We're going to pass Northeast Harbor and then sail between Gilpatrick Cove on Mount Desert Island proper and Greening Island to the south. And once we pass Greening Island, we will pass the entrance to Somme Sound, which will be on our starboard side, and we will sail into north. At this point, we're between Greening Island to the south and Mount Desert Island to the north. In particular, we're passing Gilpatrick Cove, where the local racing fleet moors their boats. There's a mix of International 1 designs, Lueders 16s, and other boats in there. And as we're sailing across here, we're going to pass two boats headed east. And here comes the first one. These are both small boats. There was surprisingly little boat traffic out for a very pleasant Sunday afternoon here on Mount Desert Island, Maine. So there goes one boat, and the second one's coming in. Again, a small boat, maybe 25 feet, but towing a big dinghy. And now we're going to continue on our sail west, and as we continue, you can just start to see the entrance to Somme Sound, which goes up the middle of Mount Desert Island, almost 2/3 of the way through the island. At this point, we've passed Greening Island and are continuing west toward Norwood Cove. As we look north, we can look right up Somme Sound, and the sound is quite narrow, but at this point there's about 5 miles to the end of Somme Sound and Somme's Harbor, and it's quite pleasant up there usually. Today it would be comfortably warm, but the wind was blowing out of the south, so there'll be a strong south wind going up the sound, and you would be straight into the wind going back out. Plus the tide is going in, so although you get a nice tidal boost going up the sound, in addition to beating, you would be going into the tide on the way back out. Here we are sailing west into Norwood Cove. We're pretty much sailing into the setting sun since it's about 4 o'clock here. Ahead of us you can see the 140-foot sailboat Rebecca, and the plan is to sail past the Rebecca, tack around so that we can get some pictures with the sun behind it. At this point we've sailed past the Rebecca and we've tacked around so the sun is now behind us and we can get some better pictures of this 140-foot ketch. It's got some beautiful woodwork on it, although we won't come close enough to see that. From here, we sailed east past the Rebecca, past the north side of Greening Island, and back out into the Great Harbor proper. We tacked around just before we got to Sutton Island, and then sailed back along the south side of Greening Island to the entrance to Southwest Harbor, where we furled up the jib and motored the last 3/8 of a mile back to the mooring. Anyway, that's today's sail in the Great Harbor of Mount Desert Island, Maine. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell. Thanks for watching.